your designer research doesn't have to be based on a jewellery designer. It could be based on an artist's work who you just happen to enjoy. So it might be that you've seen a particular painting that's grabbed your eye and you want to learn a bit more about that process or the colours or the person behind it. In my instance, I've decided to base my design research on a designer called Brian Froud. He's an artist who became quite famous for his pictures of fairies. So that's linked to my design context. At this stage of my research, I have no idea if he's ever done any work in relation to products such as jewellery, but it doesn't matter. It's the content of his artwork that appeals to me and that I want to explore more. And this style of working might be something that I then incorporate into my own design work. But right now, on the pages that I'm doing, I'm not thinking too far ahead about that. I'm not thinking about how I could turn his artwork into jewellery or anything like that. I'm just exploring his artwork and playing around with some more techniques, exploring with different mediums. So here I'm using acrylic paint just to make onto my sketchbook. Don't worry too much about how you might use the work to help you with your design ideas. It might be that none of it is relevant and none of it helps you, but it's a starting point, and it might lead you down other routes that actually get you to a point where you can use some of that content for your design ideas later on. So it's just a case of, again, collecting visual examples. I would strongly suggest recreating at least one of those, like I'm doing here. I'm just playing with the blues of the acrylic paint to replicate those aspects of the illustration that grabbed my attention. It doesn't have to be an entire copy of that piece of work. I've just chosen a certain element that I wanted to focus on. And then you could do some research on that designer, their background, how did they start out, what work have they been associated with, what sorts of things have they designed or made, what materials do they use, what are their mediums, and just more and more examples that you could perhaps go on to use later on within your design ideas. Again, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. This is just about experimentation, and it might be that you are only able to fill one page of ideas, or you can go several pages into your sketchbook and just keep exploring. Maybe you find more materials that you want to include within your work, that you want to replicate within your sketchbook, or that you want to annotate, so perhaps giving your opinion, give an analysis of a piece of work as well. Remember to try and fill the spaces on your sketchbook. It doesn't matter if you overlap onto your printouts like I'm doing here. I think it's quite a nice effect because it really fills the page up and doesn't allow for too much white space. Once again, this is your opportunity to develop your style and your own way of working. Now, as a result of me doing this initial piece of research based on his fairy illustrations, I then found out that Brian Froud was linked to a couple of major film productions, and ones that actually I really enjoyed and visually I found really grabbing. So my further research showed me that he worked with Jim Henson in creating the illustrations and the ideas for the characters for two major films that were popular when I was growing up, called The Dark Crystal and The Labyrinth, which then meant I could explore something further, still along the theme of mythical creatures, because both of these films came from and were focused on mythical creatures. But actually, if I hadn't done that initial research on Brian Froud, I wouldn't have found this information. So this is how your research will take you down different routes, and you might find something that's really going to help you with the design ideas later on, just through accident like I've done here. So once again, I've got some more visual ideas, and this is where, film is such a great research point, because visually there's just so much going on with the sets and the characters and props that are used. So your designer research doesn't have to be based solely on a product. You could look at comic artists, for example, if that was relevant, if there was something there that grabbed your attention or you thought you could link to your context. Book illustrations as well. There are certain illustrators that have particular styles of working. But certainly film or TV programs are another good place to look for some visual ideas and inspiration for your design context. Once again, most of my research here is about sketching and just including examples of the work. Remembering as well that it's good practice to just try out different mediums, because you're developing your skills in different areas by doing that. If you know you're good with coloured pencils and you only use coloured pencils, yes, you might be developing that skill, but you're not then moving forward with any other skills like painting skills. So it's well worth changing it around, even within the same page. So I'm using watercolour pencils here now, whereas on the previous page I used acrylic paint. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This isn't a fine art project, this is you just sketching from your research. So it can be quite rough and ready and done fairly quickly as well. Now it might be that from this illustration, for example, I get the idea of using certain colours together in my jewellery items later on, or certain textures, because this character has quite a hairy texture to it. It doesn't have to be an item that I use and recreate as a jewellery item, it's just I could get inspiration from it in different ways. But again, don't try to think too much ahead. Don't try and think of a final product and how you might use it at this point. This is just collecting and gathering ideas. Of course, if you have got some ideas that you desperately want to get down on paper at this stage, then draw next to it. If it's inspired by a sketch you've just drawn, then draw it next to it so that I can see your thought process. Again, it doesn't have to be a perfect sketch, it just can be a way of getting your idea down onto paper.